Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 35 of Guest Safety Officer Lobby Group. Now, this is basically us coming back to something we discussed a couple of weeks ago about the right for self-defense in the workplace. Now, we said then that we'd come back and have a look at some scenarios. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at shoplifting. We're going to have a look at in a nightclub, and we're also going to look at a mental health setting. Now, just so that everybody is aware, recently, in terms of the fact today, it was announced that the police are going to follow up on Suella Braverman's call for the police to investigate every single crime. And they have said, yes, in terms of shoplifting, they're going to do that. But just as a caveat, that actually means they're going to be looking at violent crime, in particular, where there's a threat of life or violence, which is understandable. Why? Because there's 1,000 shoplifting incidents each day, which, according to the Times, it costs around £2 billion a year. That's a lot of money. So much so that there is now a program that's been put together by retailers and the police, joint operation called Pegasus, which is designed at creating a database of shoplifting crimes in order to try and determine how much of this is organized and put together by organized crime gangs. It's going to take, and I know this because I was at the Retail Risk conference in Leicester a couple of weeks ago when this was announced, and it is basically going to take around 2 years. Now, don't get me wrong, as I said at that conference, that's fantastic. It's a brilliant initiative. It absolutely is. But the problem is people are still shoplifting today. The 1,000 incidents are still occurring. The staff that are involved in it are still going to be facing danger until such time as it becomes a valid and useful operational tool. And never mind, and that goes without any sort of say about what the police can then actually do once they've caught them. The police do catch people, believe it or not. The unfortunate thing is all too often CPS won't prosecute for various reasons. But that is a separate issue. So the first scenario we're going to have is in terms of shoplifting. So the other day, guys, I was at my local convenience store when a cry went out, and basically 2 girls came and stopped a man before he'd left the store. And this stop was done on the basis of their friends saying, this man's stolen some goods. They challenged him and asked him to turn out his pockets in the store, in public, where I, standing at the till, paying for my goods, could hear every single word that was said, including when their comrades said, when they asked the girl who'd called them, did you see anything? They then turned round and said, oh, well, no, but he was nicking yesterday. So this man was 6'2", 6'3". To be honest, you know, he could have picked either of these young ladies up under each arm and given them a good hiding. What would be the situation there? Are we allowed to approach them? Are we able to stop them before they've left the store? Has a criminal offence occurred? Who's caused it? That's basically the scenario. And what should we do? Or what should we think? What do you think we should have done in a situation like that? Guys, yeah. So Gary, thoughts?
Well, thoughts on it. Working in that environment, what was always played out by some of these policies which were placed out, and what we were always told is nothing is being stolen until they've left the shop, and that's what's always been played out. Until they've actually left the premises, walked through that door, that property has not been stolen. So they've got every opportunity to pay for it up until that point.
I worked as a store manager for blimey, let's say Tesco's, Asda. Yeah, I also worked in a small local shop, not unlike a co-op, but not a co-op, I might add, as a manager. And so, yes, my training from 1979 until I finally left that industry was always there to leave the store, and furthermore, you weren't to get involved with them until that had happened, and you actually had to see the goods being stolen. So that was my training throughout those periods, and I have since checked, and by and large, that policy, as I understand it, remains in place today. So, Trevel, in terms of, in terms of, as soon as you stop someone, what kind of pressures are, we under at that point in terms of this policy saying you can't do A or you can do B?
Okay, I suppose a couple of things, and forgive me, I am trying to answer the question, but there's a lot within the question itself.
Yeah.
I think from the broader perspective, kind of narrowing down, the moment if we stop somebody, however we choose to challenge them, whether it's with a capital C or a small c, if you follow where I'm trying to go with that, then, we're starting to get into the area of taking away their liberty. So we're keeping them in situ against their will.
Yeah.
In that first instance, and we've got that to keep in mind. And there's right ways or wrong ways of doing that. But then, we also come to the point of, notwithstanding the policy, as Gary's reiterated quite rightly, that's outside of the shop. But, what was their reasonable suspicion for intervening in the first instance? Because, by your intro, well, you saw them naked yesterday. Well, by default, that doesn't make it right, does it, in this instance? So we've taken away somebody's liberty against their will, and now we potentially falsely accuse them of something we haven't seen them do, which is not a good start point.
Well, I'd agree with that. The thing is there, absolutely, but it then creates a point of conflict, doesn't it? A potential conflict, Gary.
Well, of course it does. I was going to slightly digress here, because we're talking about policy. A lot of these self-checkout things now, sometimes they beep, and obviously the security officers now got to intervene on this, or a member of staff's got to intervene, haven't they, before they leave the store?
Well,
I know it's slightly going off part, but it's the same thing.
It is going off part, and I do want to come back to that, Gary. But
they can't. But yeah, it's the same thing. If they've got to stop that person, as what Trevel says, we're depriving them of their liberty, and you've got a situation again, both sides, isn't it? You're holding them there, you've got them their suspicion, but as it states, until they leave that store, nothing has been stolen.
That's right. And by the way, that will include the self-checkout. It will by default. You have got, in order for you to have stolen, you have got to have clearly demonstrated to the court, or to the thing, that you had no intentions of paying. Not, I thought he wasn't, not he might have done, or she might have done. It's got to be rock solid they'd left the store. And in court cases in the past that I know of personally, that even when they've left the store, you're still going to find yourself in a world of pain, arguing that if they have a good barrister. But the point that I was asking Gary, and maybe is your conflict management skills at that point, Trevel, when you've deprived somebody of their liberty. First of all, you've got to know that you've done the right thing, haven't you? You've got to know the law, haven't you?
Ideally, you should know the law, because if you stop somebody wrongly, then arguably you've got it wrong at that point. But again, it's like all things, isn't it? It's how we approach people in that very first instance.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we've all been approached by people. Let's be honest, they, let's say, challenged us, for want of a greater expression, about something. And I'm sure we can all reflect on somebody's challenged us about something, but they've done it, let's just say, in a very professional manner. We weren't happy about it, but we kind of accepted it because they've been very professional in their approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think by default, that is a key factor in all of these, isn't it? How we smartly do this. Yeah, particularly if it's around reasonable suspicion, because if we haven't seen them take anything, then we really need to be, very professional in our approach. Very professional.
Yep. And I know, and I use that example purely and simply because I know they didn't, because I heard her say, "Oh yeah, he nicked stuff yesterday. I think he's got something." Absolutely, but the other side of that, of course, is doing it in a public forum. The standard procedures, you ask people to come back to the office where you'll discuss this in private. Having a public display in that, you are actually encouraging and increasing the likelihood, I would suggest, for a violent reaction. God knows, if they'd have said it to me, I'd have been booming.
Well, I think Gary was, and if I get this wrong, Gary, please correct me, but I think Gary was alluding to, like all plans, plans are done in a safe environment. So by default, most times they're perfect. Yeah. The moment we get into the work environment and we start to implement the plan, a lot of the time it's compromise. Yeah. So therefore we're on dynamic risk. And I appreciate dynamic risk to be a cliche for people. The point I'm trying to come to is that, of course, we get the ideal plan is to take them into an enclosed area where we can speak to them privately. Yeah. But depending on the number of staff, the number of people in the retail area, etc., which has got to be resourced, there's a lot of factors that come into play. So whilst you're trying to have a private conversation with somebody, it may not be in a private area. And I don't know if Gary, if I've kind of picked up where some of where you're trying to go with what you were saying before.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if in that environment it works, on paper, we've moved into a private area, a safe space, blah, 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 where we can have a chat with people, what have you. But in some of these circumstances, it doesn't work like that, because if you look at some of these big stores where they literally go in there, they're rushing and they're rushing out. They've grabbed a load of stuff. They've gone, and that isn't going to work, and where do you go from there? Once they've left the store with, the TV set or the computer under their arm, how far are you going to go? What's your limitations like? Are you going to run down the street? We all know, but if you run down the street, suddenly you're not covered by insurance, the shop insurance, the company insurance. You're on your own as soon as you're saying like 20 feet or 10 feet outside that perimeter. Person falls over. We've heard it in the past. Sorry, people. Yep, we've heard it in the past where, an officer's chased someone down the road, they've fallen over and they've died, and that person, is now being, sued in court for chasing the person down the road. A lot of the big main operators have a no chase policy or a hands off policy.
Quite right too. Within the context, I mean, as I was saying, I think to Trevel on another call, the situation is that the case law that's built up here around shoplifting has been done over decades. It's not just a thing. They've done it because retailers have been burned at every single stage of the game. There's nothing that they can do because everybody looks at it and says, "Oh well." It was interesting. I saw Michelle Dewberry on GB News the other day, and she was berating the idea that a police officer had tasered a 14-year-old for stealing a £5 block of cheese. But surely that was over the top, apparently. So stealing cheese or things like that, if you're young, is apparently okay. It's all right, or we've got to find another way of doing it. Going back to this, the fact is it isn't realistic. what I would go back to Trevel and say is, you're absolutely right in terms of store resources. Absolutely 100%. The days when you had banks of tills all manned have all gone. People walk in, they can carry their own bag, they can scan, self-scan. There's a whole host of things that now make it very, very easy for potential shoplifters to carry out their trade, or to ply their trade, as it were. And there are then no staff to be able to properly confront them in a manner that is commensurate and respectful with the idea and the assumption that they may be innocent, which is what you should always work on. Is there's nobody there to do it. So you're then creating the situation where, as Gary says, what's the collateral damage? I mean, from your professional experience, Trevel, if I chased if I chased somebody who'd left the store and I caused them damage, or somebody else got damaged as a result of that chase, who would be at fault? Because I would have thought the person wasn't presenting a danger.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors that come into play, but yeah, I suppose there's many parallels here. So like whole mode of defense, for example, what point, does it start to become, if you wish, retaliation? What reasons, what rationale are we chasing them down the road for? And coming back to what have they actually stolen, for example? Because there's a lot of factors that come into play. But can I also hijack it just slightly for a moment?
Yeah.
What you said, what Gary mentioned a moment ago, but that balance is, so we're back to, we've either seen somebody take something, or B, they had something in their hand. But the point I'm coming to is they leave the shop, we no longer see that item and they haven't paid for it. Yeah. So the point we're coming to then with the policy, the start point around a challenge, if we feel safe enough to do so, is when they're on the other side of the door.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Don't get me wrong. Yeah, when I've been responsible for, when you're responsible for the profit of loss of a store, and every single piece of item, every item in that store, every product, is a potential reason why you get dismissed, don't get promoted, etc. Various other things. It's very, very heartbreaking, and you're encouraged, and rightly so, by companies, retail companies, to take it personally. And my book is you should. You wouldn't let somebody come in and steal cheese out your fridge in the house, would you? And that, we'd expect somebody to do something about that. But that, I think, is that's what I think makes this whole subject interesting, is where you are, what you do. What should you do as a security guard in retail? And my view is the current policy is step away. Nobody's going to save you. You're on minimum wages an hour. You've got Section 44. You cannot, because as you were saying earlier, and I know Jim O'Dwyer would say, sadly he couldn't be with us today, but Jim O'Dwyer saying Section 44 protects us as a security guard and the staff from having to face that particular situation in that environment where essentially you're being asked to protect product. You're not saving lives, you're protecting product. And as we were always told, and this is obviously going back to the late 70s, early 80s, when I started in retail, is that, you can always get another piece of cheese. You can't always get another life. So, I mean, Gary, what do you think on that?
I see where you're coming from. Yeah, what you're actually saying is true. You can always get another piece of cheese, but then why are we supplying security officers there? Are we there as a deterrent? Are they a deterrent? It's proved several times now that they're not a deterrent. Anyone can literally walk in, do what they want, and walk out. And when you've got large stores with a hands-off policy, a lot of these people out there know this. So what is the purpose? What is the purpose?
I would agree with that. Trevel?
Although people would probably argue against the point, but it is the deterrent element there, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I take the point, Gary. I'm not trying to deliberately be contradictory. I take the point you're saying, but it is the deterrent element of it. But ultimately, we're going to reinforce until such time as they, let's say, leave the shop premises, then we are truly information intel gathering, aren't we?
Yeah.
100%.
Have you got any ideas? Sorry, Trevel. It's just I apologize. I thought you finished, but I just wondered what your recommendations about the kind of steps that we can take before we reach the point of confrontation. What kind of things do you think? Because I know we spoke about some things beforehand.
Well, I'm just going to expand on the information gathering and having some form of process, a process template. Nothing too onerous, please, but people can make a note of the information, details about the person and or persons. The reason I say that, we come back to when they're outside of the shop door, for many, many reasons, we may not feel confident or comfortable to challenge them anyway. So by default, we're relaying that information on, aren't we, to the police and or others in that first instance. So I appreciate I haven't specifically answered, but I think, a template which isn't onerous so people can gather information, intel about people.
What about active bystander, adopting an active bystander approach?
Probably, Gary, if you want to go in the first instance, then I'll maybe just...
Well, an active bystander, I mean, an active bystander, what we're looking at Ian's scenario, first of all, is they've made an assumption. And again, they've cast them guilty without even knowing the facts. They've gone guilty from previous experience. So the active bystander, again, that can lead to misinterpretation or anything. You've got a security officer there or the manager there, and now they've been pulled into a situation which, first of all, they've been told the person's stealing. They haven't been stealing. They were caught stealing previous day, and now we're accusing the person of stealing, which they haven't stolen. So we now stepped into a situation now where we've listened to non-factual information, which can lead us down another path of being sued or anything else on that part because we've listened to an outside source.
Right, totally agree. Thing very interesting. Well aware of the time now, so I've just been told. So I just really want to move on to the other topics and cover them. Hopefully, which we'll have done most of that here in this first episode. So the next episode, the next scenario is nightclub. You're working on a single door thing. Something kicks off inside. As a guest safety officer working in the social economy, the nighttime economy, your responsibility is no longer to product. It's about the safety of actual people, be they staff or so. What, Gary, in your experience, does that deliver?
Well, the problem there, you're working by yourself, which, as we all know, you're expected to go in there and break up that trouble. Now, most security officers nowadays, or guest safety officers, they're not 6 foot plus martial artists, bodybuilders, anything like that. They're not big units. They're small units. And they're expected to get involved with a group of people with minimal training and minimal skills. And they've got to try and stop that situation. And in turn, try and get that person out of the building safely, responsibly, without getting hurt themselves. Does it work? Yes and no. It doesn't. Depends who you are and how you are. If you're a small unit, it's not going to work. No matter how many conflict management skills you've got, once that scenario is happening, you're involved in it, and you've got to be using every possible means to your capabilities to try and get that person out or break that situation up. Before
I bring Trevel in, what would happen to someone who didn't step forward? guest safety officer who didn't try and intervene? How would their career go?
The career's going to go downhill rapidly, isn't it? Because they're expected to get involved, and that's what that's what venue operators. That's what they expect. They're paying for security to get involved. They want you to get involved. They want the 6'6" bouncer, but they don't want to pay for the 6'6" bouncer because we've now got the SIA. So rapidly, what the first thing is, let's get rid of them. They're no good for us. They're no good. They couldn't stop that. They couldn't stop that. I'm not going to say that. And look at the size of them. And that's exactly it's good. They've gone. They've been moved out.
Trevel?
Yeah, it's going to seem like I'm sitting on the fence, but I'm not. What I mean by that is an expectation that people take a positive course of action. Yeah, and I know we can get into what does that mean, but the point I'm also coming to, though, is that, unless you can tell me a job where somebody is expected to go forward when they know they're going to get battered, to put it crudely, which makes no sense. Yeah, so there's an expectation, don't get me wrong, in lots of jobs, enforcement type roles or the overlap into enforcement, where picking up on Gary's point, you're expected to go forward and manage. And I get that. Of course, I get that. But there's that fine line, isn't there? There's lots of times we go forward and manage, and we're going to go, you know what, maybe a few bumps and bruises here, etc., themselves. But, if you're standing there looking at somebody and think the world is going to collapse around you, then we may have to manage that, not necessarily hands-on, but trying to take some positive course of action. But I say to lots of people in that moment, if you think you're going to get horribly, badly hurt, psychologically, is the average person going to go forward at that point?
I was going to say, I agree. I mean, I've seen it in the past. I've seen things go horribly wrong, and I've seen guys just step back and watch, and it's got worse and worse and worse. I've seen security officers or guest safety officers absolutely run. I had a good thing back in many years ago. A prime thing, we were in Shoreditch. It was a single man door. The guy intervened with something. The guys came back with baseball bats for him. The guy closed the door. They smashed through the door, and the guy ran. I was standing with a couple of people, and I went, look at that guy running for his life. And I went, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you run for your life? This guy's with baseball bats. What do you want to do? He's not going to win, And they said, should we go and help him? And I went, well, for one, it's out of our remit, because as soon as we cross that road, we're not insured. Two, I'm not facing guys with baseball bats, face guys with baseball bats who I don't know anything about. He's running. We're safe. You got to let it go,
And let's read the reference, call it a red zone risk, baseball bats, if you follow. So if we make it an amber or a green, just by, I'm just using that because people have their own interpretations around what I'm saying. But if we just think of a green, low, then, if people don't go forward and manage and it's low, then there may understandably be questions to ask afterwards. Because in certain roles, we know he's going to carry certain risks. And again, I know a lot of what I'm saying may appear to contradict myself, but I'm just trying to give that analogy. We acknowledge that people may not feel confident in that moment to do the job. But post the incident, when the welfare is done and they're being debriefed and they're being reviewed, it may be, you know what, this isn't the job for you. And those things have got to be taken into consideration.
I totally agree. I think you're right. I think the thing that, and I know we've touched on this, and the reason I picked it is because it's about one-man doors again. Yes, you've still got Section 44 that could come into that, and in any working environment, as we all know. But how you're supposed to have any sort of authority or way of working on a one-man door, I do not know, and I, for the life of me, cannot understand why licensing authorities continue to allow the presence of one-man doors. There is no risk, proportionate risk. You need two people once that kicks off, not one. Why they continue to allow one-man doors, and worse still, allow members of staff who've taken a door license, an SIA door license, to be classed as part of that security team on the night when it's clearly not, is beyond me. Right. Very quickly moving on, because I think this really brings in you, Trevel, in there we are in a mental health setting where they put, you know, and I know, again, from personal experience and things that people have told me from within the thing, where mental health nurses, people working in mental health institutions or in NHS situations, are expected to have or maintain a hands-off approach, despite the fact that they're being physically attacked by people who are known to be dangerous, who are behaving in a dangerous manner, due to various vulnerabilities. What's could you sort of, is there a defense against that for these people?
Yeah, there are organisations in mental health and or others in that kind of remit describing where they have a no touch, no hands on policy, whatever term they want to call it, then it's just fundamentally wrong. Yeah, you're taking away somebody's basic rights to protect themselves and or others. And before people perhaps get a little bit too excited when I'm saying the basic rights, even the rights to walk away, because a lot of those policies, people I've spoken to, infer upon the staff that they have to stand there and take it. Because when I've spoken to them and questioned them, they didn't feel they were empowered to walk away from it because of the fact that the person had mental health issues or in other areas where they were emotionally distressed. So I think it's just fundamentally wrong.
Have you had any experience of this, Gary, in your?
Yeah, I mean, when I worked for the Mental Health Authority or NHS, when we were working on the mental health side of it, our rules of engagement were slightly different. For us, there wasn't a hands-off policy. If it was a threat to life, we could overrule the clinician. But anything we had to deal with, anything to restraint-wise, we had to get the clinician or the senior person to confirm, as I say, unless it was a threat to life. And I was involved in many situations where I stood there in front of the clinician going, I'm asking you, do we have permission to restrain? Yes or no? And it's escalating. And 9 times out of 10, the clinician saw it was right for us to do that. But the decision making on that process sometimes was that seconds. It's only a few seconds, but things are escalating rapidly. And they were always humming and hawing. I don't know. And that was the whole panic from them, from their policies. And it was the fact is because we had different rules of engagement. It was literally a case of, if it's a threat of life, we will overrule you. Make a decision now. And they quickly made the decision, but there was always that fallback. They were always very careful on their approach because they were always worried about that policy which was in play.
Trevel?
Well, I find it interesting that on the basis of only oneself is accountable for one's actions when it comes to physical intervention and more, then, for example, another person can tell us 3 that we're supposed to go in and put hands on somebody, but we may not feel comfortable to do that.
It's the thing, I can, obviously there are various tales, and I know we've all got various tales that we can tell, but one of my friends was working in an environment, mental health environment, where they weren't supposed to actually have a hands-on policy, and the nurses that were working there, some of them young female nurses were there, is that they found themselves scared and afraid, and in the end they relied upon the old hands to turn up, as it were, and relieve them of that pressure, because they would come along and they would make decisions that they didn't feel comfortable in making. And one of my friends told me they were regularly, what would happen in the debriefs, these young nurses would turn around and say, "Oh, I wasn't comfortable about doing that. I didn't think it was all right to do that." But because we lost so much experience over time, does that make sense? And the reason they did that is because they're constantly being told from the colleges, etc., that laying hands on a patient is fundamentally wrong, on a moral. But so they find themselves really in really difficult positions. Have you found that in anything that you've dealt with, Trevel?
Yeah, I've come across that on a number of occasions where, I suppose the fact whether it's somebody with mental health, whether it's a young person, whether it's a very elderly person, the inference being is that it's a no-touch policy within itself overall. But I think one of the things that we must be mindful of is that all physical intervention programs, the philosophy behind them is to reduce the need for any physical intervention. That's got to be the main focus of the program.
I think, I appreciate we look. I'm going to sort of bring this to an end now because we've obviously got this. I think what this session shows, and we've covered, if you think about it, we've recovered retail, we've recovered working in a nighttime environment, and we've covered working in a NHS mental health no touch setting. School would no doubt count in that as well. What's clear to me, and I think you mentioned it there, is that you need to have a clear idea, clear training on what is and isn't acceptable in all the situations that you work within, if you are to mitigate the levels of violence that may be encountered by staff, security officers, and customers. Final thoughts, Gary?
I think you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, if we want to try and avoid these situations, they need to be staffed properly, correct training for purpose, and proper policies. This would, alleviate a lot of the situations out there. As we said, one person doors, one person working on a supermarket, NHS environment, one person dealing with one thing. Proper training, proper staffing levels would mitigate a lot of these issues. Whereas instead of leaving someone alone in a room or in an open space where it may be, that one person on one person contact, it elevates the situation sometimes.
Trevel?
I think we're back to wanting to empower people, to do the right thing in the moment. And until that moment arises, it's difficult, isn't it, to dictate how they can do that unless we were doing a specific detailed case study. So when I say empower people, it may well be they just totally observe and report it afterwards.
I totally agree. And again, I echo both of those sentiments, that it's about working together, both as PI practitioners, in order to work with clients to evolve policies and processes and protocols that actually reflect the needs and necessities of the environment in which this is occurring. And that goes back to your training needs and analysis, and it goes back to a proper understanding of the law and what's going on. And that for me is that for me is it. So all things being equal, guys, we've covered a lot. We probably haven't dealt with everything as perfectly as we could have done, but I think we've given an idea of the difficulties that everybody, from shops to NHS organisations to government organisations to the hospitality industry face on a daily basis. because let's be honest, 1,000 pieces of cheese being stolen each day at £5 a time is a lot of money. Right, I will wish you all goodbye. Peace out, and thanks for being with us.
Sure.